I think it would be really easy for me to come on here and start this with some quippy joke about all the middle-aged women that were going to see the Taylor Swift film as I was coming out of this film, but I would bet every penny that I own that those middle-aged women had far more of a fun and entertaining time than I did watching this film. Because fuck me, this is boring. The Smashing Machine comes from writer, director, actor Benny Safdie, one half of the Safdie brothers, the duo behind films such as Uncut Gems and Good Time. They are a duo that I have had a lot of interest in, and I have wanted to get around to their pairing of films, but ultimately I just haven't had time yet. But their style is something that appeals to me, and their films are something that I'm pretty much guaranteed to like both of them, given the cast and given the film's themes and its nervous, sort of anxious tone and direction, and the scripts being very apparently tight but also funny. So I've wanted to get around to them for a long time. I probably will have time before Josh Safdie's Timothée Chalamet Oscar vehicle film, Marty Supreme, which comes out on Christmas Day later this year. This film, nevertheless, was one that has been highly touted at multiple festivals and was seen as very much of an Oscar vehicle in and of itself for the revelation that is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who was going for the Best Actor Oscar with this film as the Smashing Machine himself, Mark Kerr. Now, Mark Kerr was a Pride fighter as well as UFC fighter in the late 90s, early 2000s, who is seen as one of the leading pioneers and one of the first pioneers who is not well known nowadays in the UFC world, and his trials and tribulations and his success and his losses and how he failed and how he won in this world of fighting, and how he also failed and won and succeeded and lost in his personal life as well. And this film really tries to meld all of that together, and it is based on the doc of his life, The Life and Extreme Times of Mark Kerr, which goes into all the things that this film also goes into: his personal relationships with other fighters such as Mark Coleman and his wife Dawn Staples, who's played in this film by Emily Blunt. So that is Emily Blunt as Dawn Staples, that is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Mark Kerr, and we also have Ryan Bader, the mixed martial arts and UFC fighter Ryan Bader, who plays Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr's best friend in the UFC world and his trusted coach. So going into this, I had somewhat high expectations, considering that I knew that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was being touted as a Best Actor contender. Ultimately, I have just left this film with quite mixed feelings, but ultimately just feeling bored of what I've watched. I will say off the bat, I think there are two performances from Blunt and The Rock here that are absolutely knock out the park, but the rest of the film leaves a lot to be desired and doesn't really give them very much to work with, and sort of just leaves them high and dry to figure out the characters for themselves and to add a lot of context and add a lot of depth and flesh to the bones. And the script and the directing is very subpar and is stuff that we've seen done before and is very formulaic, and ultimately just does not elevate the rest of this film and does not elevate the performances or the film itself to anything that we haven't seen before, which is a lifeless, formulaic, and a bland biopic. If we start with the positives, I think Emily Blunt and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson bounce off each other incredibly well. The Rock is a revelation, in my opinion, in this film. It is unlike anything we have ever seen from him before. Now, there is a narrative that he's trying to push as part of his Oscar campaign, which is that he was told he couldn't pursue an Oscar, he could never win Best Actor. Now, that may be all well and true, and that may be something that he's using as part of his Oscar campaign, but that is also because of the films that he has chose to do.
Let me sit where Chris is sitting. So they said, Chris sits here to enjoy the movie. So I sat where Chris sat. I watched Oppenheimer, it was amazing. But I was thinking, holy shit, this thing, Red One on this screen, with this technology, it's gonna be game over.
And ultimately, this sort of presents somewhat of a reset button, where if he's interested in it, I think he probably, if it's not with this film, with the next film, he probably can win something. And given how little I believe he's given to do with the script, given how weak a lot of the dialogue is, and ultimately just like, oh, we're in a fight, I hate you, you're a bitch, blah, 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 and then eventually, oh, kiss and make up. Given that a lot of the dialogue is very basic and just boring, he elevates the character of Mark Kerr to another level because of his understanding of the character on a deep level that the film and its director and its writer don't really elevate. He elevates Mark Kerr. The film doesn't elevate Mark Kerr. And he understands this sort of soft-hearted nature that Mark Kerr has in himself intrinsically, but his need to almost subdue that soft-hearted nature so that he can go out and essentially kill someone on a mat. It's something that The Rock reflects on very well in the film. This idea that Mark Kerr wants to be this soft-hearted guy, but he also wants to be a killer in the ring, and how ultimately the film kind of suggests that he can't do both and that he needs to choose one. Now, this is heavy speculation, in my opinion. That is something that I'm sort of interpreting on my own because I don't think that the film actually cinematically or dialogue-wise really points us in that direction. But The Rock himself points us there by nothing other than his performance, where at one point he could be being very kind and nice and try to be sweet to his wife, and then in the next moment he's punching a wall to exhibit his frustration. Whilst I do think that this is a very layered and complex performance, I will say that I don't necessarily think that this is a frontrunner or a contender or a strong contender for Best Actor, simply because if we look at the last 5 to 10 years of Best Actor winners, the industry and the Academy heavily favours these quieter male performances for Best Actor now. Something like Adrian Brody, something like Timothée Chalamet is a lot more relevant to what the Academy sees itself as and what it wants to project than what The Rock is doing in this film. That's not to say he's bad necessarily. That's just to say that if he really wants this Oscar, I think he needs to go even more minimalist and even smaller than what he's trying to do here. It's probably still a bit too loud. There's a couple moments where it's like, oh, this is the Oscar moment where, you know, he's crying and then, oh, he's punching a wall. And that's something that in 2010 or in 2000, the Oscars went for. They liked those loud and bold performances, but that's not really where the Academy is at right now. They view themselves as much more minimalist and realistic, and that's not what this film is, although it wants to project a air of being realistic through its doc style, which I will get into in a minute, and I don't believe it works. Emily Blunt, I believe, is very good. She provides a performance that The Rock can bounce off of really well. Given that The Rock, until this point, hasn't been this kind of serious actor, it's necessary for a serious actor and a strong performer, particularly a female performer, to give him something that he can bounce off of and that he can learn from. And she does that very well. I think even worse than the character of Mark Kerr, Dawn Staples is really put through the ringer in this film, and the script does her no favours, and Emily Blunt really does her best in this film that she possibly can, but on multiple levels, she's kind of reduced to this vain and vacuous woman. You're never home. You're in Japan all the time. I just want you to come back home. And ultimately, if you actually read between the lines, I think Dawn Staples probably had much more of a point, a valid point, than the film kind of gives her credit for. Ultimately, it just makes her into a shrill and a shrew who's kind of holding back this great man, and oh, he's got to be here and he's got to be there, and she just doesn't understand it. And ultimately, this is my least favorite portrayal and characterization of a woman this year. I think it's really poor. It has nothing to do for her, so ultimately it just makes her out to, ultimately, if we're being honest, it kind of just tries to make her out as a bitch and a woman who has no interest in actually helping her man. That's how they want her to be perceived, and it just feels really unfair in my opinion. Don't know what its drive is. I don't know what its overall message or theme is. It doesn't know what it wants to be. Is this a film about his personal relationship with his wife, which if it is, it fails? Is this about his relationship with addiction and his, attempt to overcome it? If it does, it fails because it's never really there. Is this his relationship with Mark Coleman and other fighters and the sport itself? If so, it kind of fails. So yes, ultimately, I feel like this film was written to be a collection of scenes and a collection of moments as part of Mark Kerr's life. And ultimately, it's just not very convincing, and a lot of the elements don't really join up. And ultimately, I am not very convinced by the script. And ultimately, I'm not very convinced that Mark Kerr is a very interesting character for this film to be based around. In some sense, I think that the film is ultimately a bit of a Trojan horse, and that the real interesting film here would be the resurgence of Mark Coleman. The film ultimately kind of ends on his moment and in some sense almost tries to steal it from Coleman and give it back to Kerr. And I found that to be a bit weird. And, whilst I'm referring to this film as a collection of scenes, I actually don't even think that these scenes are cinematically very interesting or unique or something that I enjoyed even looking at particularly. I think the use of a documentary film style is very strange, considering that this film is already based on a documentary style. Why would you mimic it in that sense? That's very odd. And then there is the fact that the documentary style makes a lot of the fights in this film feel clunky and clumsy, and like you're not really aware of what was going on. And in some sense, I'm not really sure why that was done, considering that Mark Kerr's style of fighting was wrestling, and The Rock is naturally a wrestler.
So shut up, bitch!
So what is the purpose of making it clumsy and obtuse and hiding the fighting when you have legitimate fighters as part of this film who can do those moments? It's just very strange in that sense. And then there is the fact that this documentary film style of a fighter has been done better and has been done more original, which is in the form of The Fighter, the Mark Wahlberg and Christian Bale film, which also deals with struggles personally, with addiction. Overall, I just feel like this film has been done better in other sports films. I'm not really sure in more recent memory is the relationship between Emily Blunt and The Rock any more convincing than Tessa Thompson and Michael B. Jordan in Creed. That is a way more persuasive and confident relationship that is believable. So ultimately, across the Creed films and The Fighter, I think everything about this film has been done better in recent memory and in long-term memory. It's therefore, for me, that I just don't really feel like there is much going on here that I find to be particularly convincing or enjoyable. I think that The Rock probably has somewhat of a good chance of being a dark horse or the best actor, but I can't really put him above Leonardo DiCaprio right now for one battle after another. I don't think he's better than Michael B. Jordan in Sinners, but I don't know if there's as strong of a front runner contender than Timothy Marty Supreme. I don't think that this loud, abrasive style of acting is something that the Academy is very interested in. Whilst he is very good, he is transformative, he's a revelation, and I think he should be very proud of his work, and I think that he should continue to go down this path of serious acting where he's pursuing these awards. I also don't think that the rest of the film is very interesting. I don't think it's directed very well. I don't think it's written very well. I think that the writing, particularly around serious subject matter as addiction, isn't done with enough sensitivity and focus for it to be worthwhile. And I don't think that the writing of women in this film, particularly Emily Blunt's character, Dawn Staples, is done with enough sensitivity to her role and her issues with the lifestyle that Mark Kerr is leading. Whilst this film could net The Rock an Oscar, I don't think that there is much here that is actually entertaining or thought-provoking. Whilst I don't want to go in too harsh, considering I do want him to continue down this road, it's probably a failed first attempt at this sort of film, but not as a result of his efforts. He's very good, and I want to see him do more of this. I just think he needs a better script around him. I think the direction needs to be better. And then we can really talk about, like, okay, he's a serious actor now. But for now, good first attempt. it just fails in a lot of what it attempts to do. And ultimately, I think the message of this video is quite simply that everyone should watch The Fighter, and that Christian Bale should have won an Oscar for that.
He did win an Oscar for it, you useless piece of shit.